This is China conducting live-fire military drills along its border in the Tibetan Plains along the border with India. And this is India bolstering its military presence in the area. Tensions between the two nuclear-armed neighbors are at an all-time high right now. Here's why.
At least 20 Indian soldiers have been killed in clashes with Chinese forces.
A face-off with Chinese troops at Galwan Valley in Ladakh.
The hand-to-hand fighting taking place along a disputed border in the Himalayas.
Indian and Chinese troops clashed 4,267 meters above sea level in the contested Galwan Valley along what is referred to as the line of actual control on the disputed Himalayan border. 20 Indian troops, including a high-ranking officer, were reportedly killed with nail-studded batons, rocks, and rods covered in barbed wire. Not even a single bullet was fired. The two sides don't carry firearms and explosives, according to a 1996 agreement to avoid large-scale escalations in disputed zones, but even that didn't seem to work. Details on the Chinese casualties are not known, but Indian media reported at least 40 deaths, which was dismissed by Chinese authorities as fake news.
There was a deadly clash between their troops, the first in some 45 years.
India and China have had simmering border disputes that both sides were able to manage for over 40 years. So, what exactly led to this deadly slugfest? Fighting was reportedly triggered by a row over 2 tents and observation towers built by China that India claims were on its side of the LAC, despite a recent agreement against it. Indian officials say it was these structures that its troops had dismantled when they encountered Chinese forces and before a brawl ensued. But China accuses Indian troops of provocation.
在加勒万河谷现地局势已经趋缓的情况下，再次跨越时空线，蓄意挑衅，暴力攻击中方前往现地交涉的官兵，进而引发激烈的肢体冲突，造成人员伤亡。
Scuffles between Indian and Chinese troops also broke out in May at Pangong Tso, in the same region that observers say were triggered over India's construction of roads and airstrips in Ladakh. One of these roads is near the Galwan Valley, a remote and inhospitable area considered strategic as it leads to the disputed Aksai Chin, which is claimed by India but administered by China. The Western Theatre Command of the People's Liberation Army says, "The sovereignty of the Galwan Valley area has always belonged to China. But for India, Galwan is a resolved issue. It never featured in the list of 23 contested areas identified by the Indian government since it first accepted the LAC in 1993. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi appeared to downplay the clash and has denied assertions that any Indian territory had been lost.
न वहां कोई हमारी सीमा में घुस आया है, न ही कोई घुसा हुआ है, न ही हमारी कोई पोस्ट किसी दूसरे के कब्जे में है। लद्दाख में हमारे 20 जाबाज शहीद हुए, लेकिन जिन्होंने भारत माता की तरफ आंख उठाकर देखा था, उन्हें वो सबक सिखा कर गए।
China has since returned 10 Indian troops that were detained during the clashes. Though both sides seem to have avoided any further escalations along the border, anti-China sentiments are on the rise in India.
Tonight, a people's movement to boycott everything made in China is taking shape across the country. And the very sight of it is making Beijing already very nervous.
India's nationalist media outlets and traders are calling for a nationwide boycott against Chinese products and a halt in bilateral trade.
चाइना ने जिस प्रकार से लद्दाख में भारतीय सैनिकों के साथ जो बर्बरतापूर्ण व्यवहार किया, उससे पूरे देश में एक रोष और आक्रोश का माहौल है और देश के व्यापारियों ने तय किया है कि हम चाइना की वस्तुओं का बहिष्कार करेंगे और 31 दिसंबर 2021 तक चाइना से हिंदुस्तान में जो सामान आता है उसमें 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए की कमी करेंगे।
But critics warn that initiating a trade war or any such move will end up hurting the Indian economy more, as Beijing is New Delhi's second biggest trading partner, with annual bilateral trade worth $92 billion and a trade deficit of $53.57 billion in China's favor. Despite the trade volume, India and China have historically been rivals in the region. The two nuclear-armed neighbors have a long history of territorial disputes along their shared and undefined 3,488-kilometer-long border. Each side claims vast swathes of territory controlled by the other, with disagreements rooted in demarcations left from the times of British colonial rule. In 1962, a war broke out between China and India. After 4 weeks of fighting, the Chinese withdrew from Arunachal Pradesh, but held on to 40,000 square kilometers of territory in disputed Kashmir called Aksai Chin. More than 3,000 Indians were taken as prisoners, and over 1,000 Indians were killed, while the Chinese military had close to 800 casualties. Experts say that the recent face-off reflects Beijing's increasing willingness to assert its sovereignty in the region, and is a result of India's unilateral moves in the disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir. With renewed tensions between the two, could India reach out to Beijing's rivals in the US, Japan, and Australia to balance China's rise?
From a strategic perspective, right, China should want to drive a wedge between India and the United States to prevent a counterbalancing coalition. The deaths and the clash on Monday night will probably very quickly and much more rapidly push India closer to the United States, which I think is probably not what China wants.
With both sides blaming each other for transgressions, what could be next in the India-China face-off?